when is something a medical problem? When is it life? Is it normal aging? When should you take action? Are we sometimes overdiagnosing everyday experiences? Are we hyper or hypochondriacs, or are we just normal? How do you navigate the gray areas wisely and calmly? Those are the topics he's going to talk about tomorrow. And I invite everybody to come join us for an engaging, eye-opening discussion, which will be followed by our delicious lunch and, of course, wonderful company. So don't miss that tomorrow morning. And thank you to our illustrious, esteemed Rebbitzin for giving of her time. And I'm sure she'll also give some thoughts and comments in the middle of the class that will enhance Dr. Stern, Rabbi Dr. Stern. Rabbi, should we call him Rabbi? No, he's not a rabbi, but he is a doctor. He's qualified, and he's going to talk about the area he's qualified in. And he gets tremendous joy in talking to you. So I hope you'll enjoy his talk tomorrow, please God, after physio. Okay, on that note, are we ready for today's topic of discussion? Okay, let us talk about happiness, because it's a very serious matter, and people find every reason not to be happy sometimes. But let me ask you for a second to think of the worst things that happened to you this week. Good reasons why you should be sad and depressed and unhappy and lugubrious and morose and melancholy. Yes, you have some good reasons to be upset. Maybe you fell, maybe you got hurt, maybe you heard some bad news, maybe somebody insulted you, maybe someone was nice, maybe you have a ribble. Yeah, you have good reasons to be. Now let me ask you for a second to think about some good reasons to not be sad, to be happy, to count some blessings. Yeah, you got reasons to count your blessings in life? Sure. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Wow. That's impressive. So you have good reasons to be happy, right? And we know that the Jewish WhatsApp starts like this: start worrying, details to follow. I heard of an actor, he was disembarking from a plane, and he was asked how he enjoyed his flight. You know what he said? He said, "I'm exhausted from keeping the plane in the air with my worrying." So my friends, as today is Rosh Chodesh Adar, and we want to be happier and more joyous, in an effort to be happier, we have to grapple with the things that directly challenge our happiness, because I'm sure there are plenty of things. And let me ask you about that little exercise I gave you. Which list do you think was stronger and more enduring? The reasons to be upset or the reasons to be happy? Absolutely the reasons to be happy, okay? The problem is we are warriors. We worry too much. So today we're going to talk a little bit about how to be less worrisome. Okay, I want us to stop the worrying a little bit. We're going to have a little exercise in a moment to help us with that. But my point is, let's worry a little bit less. Let's focus on what's good. Let's realize that to varying degrees, all Homo sapiens, all human beings worry about things. We worry about the future. We worry about our relationships. We worry about our health. We worry about our children. There was a time you worried about your parents. What else do you worry about? Your money. Lots of oi. But you know what our expression here at Chabad Seniors Longevity Club is? Less oi, more joy. Thank you. We want you to have less oi, more joy. And so often we know that worrying is not constructive, okay? But we feel powerless to fight it when we're under the grip of worry. We get into that state of sadness, of depression, of melancholy, and it's not a good place to be in. Which is why I encourage you every single day to bring joy to others, and you'll see how it brings joy to yourself. Because when you bring happiness to another person, that joy is infectious, and it spreads, and it's contagious. So you pick up the phone, or you go visit a friend, or you don't have to travel too far. If you have a spouse at home with you, or a family with you, why don't you make them happier? I know it's not easy to start at home, but try it out. You heard about the doctor. He finished his examination and he informed the patient that he was in perfect health. So the patient says, "Well, what about my headaches?" He says, "I'm not worried about your headaches," the doctor says. The guy says, if you had my headaches, I wouldn't worry about them either. My friends, they say a neurotic is a person who worries about things that didn't happen in the past, okay? Instead of worrying about something that won't happen in the future, like normal people. Anyways, let's take a moment. Let's do this little exercise that I'm putting on the screen. And I want you to join me here and to think about different anxiety issues and disorders and concerns that people have. And my goal is not to measure our levels of anxiety. I'm not a diagnostician here, okay? But I want you to consider what type of worrier you might be and then to worry about it. No, I'm just kidding. I don't want you worrying, okay? But I just want you to think about this. And here, over the last 2 weeks, how often have you experienced the following? You know, I know when I go to my rheumatologist, because I got a shtickle gout sometimes, he always gives me a whole questionnaire to fill out. So I'm going to have you fill out this questionnaire, at least mentally. If you got a pen and paper, then write it down too. Okay, first question. Number one. We got 7 questions for you. Let's examine them. Number one, my friends, were you worrying? This is like your discovery assessment. You get discovery credit points if you score well in this. So you better score nicely. Were you worried about not being able to stop or control worrying? Okay. At the bottom was not at all, several days, over half the days, nearly every day, just for the past 2 weeks. Were you worried about not being able to control your worrying? On that note, I will tell you another maisele. Sahaimi owed a lot of money to give me another nice name, to Shali. And Shali calls Haimi's house and asks, when is he going to get paid? So Haimi's wife, Betty, answers the phone. She says, Haimi doesn't have the money to pay you. Now bugger off. So Haimi looks at his wife and says, what did you just do? I'm worried about how I'm going to pay him. She says, exactly. Why should you worry about it? Let him worry about it. All right. Question number 2. Worrying too much about different things. Okay, actually, it looks like I'm messing up your order here. So the first one was feeling nervous, anxious, or on edge. Number 2 was not being able to stop or control worrying. Number 3 is worrying too much about different things. Do you ever worry too much about different things? You could grade yourself accordingly. You know, there's a story about another guy. He was always worrying, and it caused his wife a lot of worrying. So one day he comes home and he says to his wife, darling, I found somebody who could take care of all our worries. All you got to pay him is 10,000 rand and he does all the worrying for you. So she says, yes, but how are you going to pay him the 10,000 rand? He said, I told you, let him worry about it. Okay, question number 4. Having trouble relaxing. Do you ever have trouble relaxing? I'm not going to answer all these questions for you. I'm just presenting them. You got to answer them for yourself. We'll have to deal with it together. Question number 5, being so restless that it's hard to sit still. You ever feel too restless to sit still if it happens? Yeah? Too much coffee? You like the coffee here, Chabad. Becoming easily annoyed or irritable. Do you ever feel that way? Huh? Yes? Well, what do you do about it, Jill? Worry more, I think. So you're at the right place. Today's class, we'll talk about worrying less. All right, Jill? Question number 7, feeling afraid as if something awful might happen. You ever feel afraid as if something awful might happen? So these are all worries and concerns, and I'm sure you could have plenty more. I don't want to get into that. But my point for you is, whether our worries are reasonable or not, they certainly get in the way of our joy. And our objective at Chabad Seniors Club is to have less oi and more joy. So what can we do? How do we cope with? How do we deal with? How do we handle our worrying? What strategies have you found effective in managing your worries? I'm opening the floor up for you to answer that question if anybody wants to share so others could benefit. What strategies, what ways have you dealt with your worries to have less or more joy? No? Think nice thoughts. That's a very good point. I'm going to talk about that. You just took away my thunder. I was planning to talk about have good thoughts, but that's very generic. We want to talk about focusing on the positive and less the negative. We also want to be realistic, because one can be optimistic, but they can become fanatically optimistic and in denial. One can be pessimistic and puts them into depression. And we're not trying to be one or the other. We're trying to be realistic, real. The world is a garden. It's God's garden, but it also has thorns. And how are we going to deal with those thorns? How are we going to deal with those worries and problems? Because usually your worries are coming from something genuine. Now, if it's coming from something not genuine, like some of these, sometimes we get overly worried. We're afraid something's going to happen. Maybe something bad is going to happen. But calm it down. Let's not be focused, the whole time on all the negativity. What were you going to say, Renee? Hand it over to Hashem. Okay. God, you handle it for me. You do. But the thing is, as we say here, we have a few expressions at Chabad Longevity Club. And one of them is we do our best and let God do the rest. So you got to still do your part. You'll never win that lottery with just having faith. You also have to buy the lottery ticket. Personally, I don't believe in it. And when I feel like the chances are too slim. You have a better chance of succeeding at working hard than winning the lottery. But there are some people who are lucky and do win lotteries and do well for themselves. I remember there was a fellow in the community in Los Angeles. My brother knew them. And their name was, I think, Citron. Okay? There was another Citron family in the community who won the lottery. But this Citron family was not the one who won the lottery. And this rabbi kept getting knocked on his door and phone calls and people asking him, badgering him for charity and donations and loans and handouts and help. And he's like, I'm not the one who won the lottery. Okay, yeah? What were you going to say, Shirley?
I was going to say, we need to take
Yes. Let's do it together. Shirley suggests we all take a deep breath and blow the worries out the window. Okay, so let's do it together. 1, 2, 3. I'm about to blow up. Okay, yes, pardon? Oh, yeah. We have to look for solutions, not problems. Yes, Gail. Don't overthink. Don't underthink either, but don't overthink. Good point. Yes, absolutely. Yes, and the truth is, we know that we all have worries, but let's see, because we're not the first ones to worry. Worrying existed long ago. You'll find it in Tanakh. So why don't we open Tanakh, starting with the Torah. What does Torah mean? Instruction, right? So we could get an instruction, advice for life. So one of the most interesting books in Tanakh I actually find is the book of Mishlei, Proverbs. You think that the Chinese have Proverbs? Yeah, in the cookies you find the Chinese. You ever get those Chinese, what do they call those? Fortune cookies. Fortune cookies. Well, long before the Chinese fortune cookies, I'm not certain about that. Maybe they came first, I don't know. But King Solomon wrote a book of Proverbs too. And what did he have in there? Many different short, insightful teachings on how to conduct our lives in a wise manner, okay? He was a wise man, although some question his wisdom, because, they say he had 1,000 wives. Did he not know that with 1,000 wives come 1,000 mothers-in-law? So in chapter 12 of Mishlei, my friends, King Solomon writes, okay, he says, and he talks about human worries, and he says it as follows. He says, Daga belev ish, if you have worries in your heart, you know what he should do? King Solomon listened to Renee. What did you say, Renee, if you got worries? Well, he said, cast them away. Throw them away. As Shirley said, just take a deep breath and blow out the air. Okay, so that's very good. Now, the thing is, pardon?
as long as she doesn't blow far.
Your way, okay, no worries. So this verse that King Solomon says, he seems to be saying that if someone's worried, they should just cast it out of your mind, right? Ignore it. Maybe suppress it. Yes? Now, this seems to be actually another meaning as well. a worry in a person's heart quashes it. You know what that means? It's a different way of understanding the verse, because in Hebrew, words could be understood in multiple ways. And he's maybe saying that worry is what quashes your heart. Worry is what diminishes us and makes us weak when we're worrying all the time. And the Talmud uses that interpretation that when you have too much worry, it's very worrisome. Okay. So another way of understanding this verse is a worry in a person's heart casts you away. It's another way to understand it. Okay. So the Talmud actually analyzes this, and we're going to look here on the Talmud Daf Ayin Hey Amud Aleph, Tractate Yuma, page 75a, the first side of the page. Says the Gemara, Rav Ami and Rav Asi. One said, Yasichena midaitoi. What does it mean? You should cast it away. So one said, cast it away from the mind, because in Hebrew, again, especially when there's no nikudot, no vowels, a word could be understood in a few ways. So the first way of understanding is cast it out of your mind. But another meaning is, that I think was Rav Ami, and the second one is Rav Asi. He says, don't read it as Yasichena, which means to cast it away, but Yisichena, which means you should talk about it. Some of us pent up, what's the word, where you hold it in and it gets pent up, you know what I'm saying? We're holding it until we explode, because we have so much pent up anger and worry and problems. It becomes a bigger problem. Now, one of the beauties of having friendship, of coming to Chabad House a little early, so you don't have to talk during the shir, you can talk about it before the shir, or during lunch after the shir. Talk with your friends. Right? So the first one says, like Renee and Shirley, remove it from your mind. That's Rav Ami. But Rav Asi says, you know what else you could do? You could talk about it. Yisichana. Have a friend. That's the beauty about friends. A friend in need is a friend indeed. So talk about it. Have a friend, pick up the phone, or come to Chabad House, or wherever it is. Maybe find a stranger in the street who wants to hear all your problems. Yeah, no, there's a lady who once came to my office, and she said to me, Rabbi, she gets all these horrible headaches. I said, what are you coming to me for? Go to the doctor. She said, no, the doctor charges. I'm coming to you. You're free. So anyway, she starts hacking me at Chinik and hacking. I said, Genug Shen already. She says, you're a miracle worker, Rabbi. I don't have the headaches anymore. I said, no, now I have the headaches. Nevertheless, my friends, you could talk about them with somebody else. And that's perhaps what Rav Asi is saying. He says, have a friend, talk with your friend. And, it's not enough if you could cast it away, wonderful. Is it so easy to really cast away all your problems? I don't know how easy that is for people. We say, get it out of your head. I'm just thinking the other night, something came to my mind. I was worried I couldn't fall back asleep. And there's like 2 o'clock in the morning when I'm usually going to sleep. And now I can't even fall back asleep. And the whole night, there's worries in my head, and it had to do with our renovation, our construction. Is the shul going to be ready for the bat mitzvah, etc.? And we already packed out the bookings, and people are reserved, and now we don't have room, and we got a few last minute bookings. Where we're going to put them? Where we're going to fit them? All these worries in my head, and I can't sort it out, and I can't figure it out. What are we going to do? Are we going to have electricity? Are we going to have water? Anyways, I can't share with you all my worries. Now you have the worries, right? So
That's one way.
We have my daughter's bat mitzvah on Sunday, and obviously we would have wished to invite everybody we know, but we couldn't. It was limited, and we had to invite people and then keep it limited to. It was mostly her own personal friends who we were able to include. She selected. It's her event. So for her event, we said you invite the people who are closest to you. You invite, but then our shul is a limited space, so we had to limit it based on who reserved, who confirmed. Either way, I had to worry now about. Are we going to have lights? Are we going to have water? Are we going to have electricity? Because all these things aren't, it's a construction site. It's not our shul's not finished yet. Anyways, I didn't come here to share with you all my worries. But the point is that the first sage, Rav Ami, is saying that when you have worries, try to get rid of them. Push them out. How do you push them out is the first thing I want to ask you. You say cast them away. Is it so easy? So I'll tell you, think about something else, right? Think about, that's the truth. Our sages suggest this in the Talmud. Think when you're having negative thoughts, try to think positive thoughts. But at the end of the day, if I tell you, stop thinking about a pink rhinoceros, don't think about it, I told you. Why are you still thinking about it? So what happens? Usually you're going to think about that pink elephant or whatever you want to call it. And that's what happens. We start worrying about those things. So the first sage is saying, try to get rid of it. How do you get rid of it? Maybe fill your mind with positive things, okay? But according to him, you could get rid of the negative thoughts, okay? Maybe you could ignore them. Maybe you could do something else. But Rav Asi is getting a little bit more, he has a different perspective. He says, that's not what King Solomon said. They're debating on what King Solomon said. Because Shlomo Melech's words were, Dagas belevish, yesichenu. How do you translate yesichenu? You could translate it as cast them, push them away. You could translate it as discuss it. Anyways, we'll get back to that. But let's think about this. What's more effective for you? Casting it away or talking about it with somebody else? Talking about it, right? You are able to, what's the word? You have a sounding board, right? And many people have benefited from talking through, discussing their worries with somebody else, right? And there are many reasons why this could work. In fact, our commentaries discuss this. And Rashi explains, he says, talking about a worry with a friend could often lead to the friend giving you, providing sound advice that maybe I couldn't think of it on my own. But now that we're talking about it with each other, what happens is sometimes I'm stuck in my dark place and I can't think out of the box. And you coming in objectively, all of a sudden see another solution that I never thought of, right? So when a person is able to articulate their problem, sometimes even while I'm talking about it, I could think of something that I didn't think of before. Because maybe when I was thinking about it, my mind was closed or whatever it was. And now all of a sudden I have a clearer mental assessment of the situation just by talking about it. I found that sometimes just me talking, I find the solution on my own. So before you even open your mouth, the fact that I'm talking with you, it already helps me realize that the problem is not as severe as perhaps I originally thought. Or maybe I already think of the solution. And that's another point here. So when you look at this word here, I want you to look at the word in Hebrew, yasichena and yesichenu. Yasichena means to cast it away. And yesichena means to talk about it with a friend. Same exact spelling, but two different meanings. So that's the first thing. Those were King Solomon's words. He left it somewhat ambiguous, open for interpretation. And we already have three interpretations. One, the Gemara says, yasichena, that when you have worries, it squashes you. It makes you, it casts you down or it casts you away. And think about it. What ages us? What causes us problems? They say ulcers don't come from what you eat. They come from what eats at you. Okay, maybe both are true. I'm sure some of the things we eat also cause us ulcers. But certainly the things that eat at us. And one simple solution might be, to try to just think, to be solution oriented, to think, is it really helping me to worry so much? And if I can't resolve it, think about many of the worries we've had in the past. All of us. I could think right now of plenty. The worrying doesn't help. It's the solutions that help. And at the end of the day, did you get past it? Are you here today? Maybe some of those worries seemed insurmountable at the time. You thought, it's impossible. How will I extricate myself from this? And look at you today. You've gotten past it. And you're fine. Thank God, right? So every problem ultimately has a solution. I'll never forget, I mentioned this before, the day I learned that my mother was diagnosed with a dreadful disease. And the doctor said she had weeks left to live. Thank God she lived for years, which is a reminder to the doctor that it said in the parsha last week, V'rapeh yirapeh. The doctor's job is to heal. The doctor's job is not to prognose people. I guess there's always a prognosis, but the doctor should give hope of healing. The Torah doesn't tell the doctor to tell a patient that they're beyond hope. I'm looking for a better word for that. But basically, some doctors like to tell people that they're beyond hope. I remember the doctor telling us about my mother, that it's a catch-22, and we should let her be a guinea pig, an experiment for their research. And my mother said, no, thanks, I'm not a guinea pig. I'm not going to be your experiment. And we found a better doctor. The irony was, the original doctor was a religious Jew with a beard and all. It was shocking to me that he didn't live by our Torah's values, that he wasn't able to live with that hope. And we went to a doctor, I don't know what religion she was Greek. And she spoke so much more Jewishly. She said, you know what she said to my mother? I'm not God. I cannot tell you how much longer you could live. That was a relief that was a breath of fresh air. She said, but as God's medical agent, I will do my very best for you. Unbelievably more encouraging that was to us. You know, there were two Talmudic sages. I'm forgetting their names, and I keep forgetting because I told you the story a few weeks ago, and it skipped my mind again since then. So if any of you want to quickly Google the names of those two sages, I would appreciate it. But there were two sages who were both converts to Judaism. Not only were they converts to Judaism, but they were descendants of some terrible people who caused the destruction of the first temple. Okay, so these really weren't, they were descendants of bad people. But they changed, they pivoted, they completely metamorphosized, and they became converts to Judaism, the irony. And there have been plenty such. Even Titus, who destroyed the second temple, had a nephew, or was it Nero's nephew? I'm forgetting who it was now. One of the greats had a nephew, I think Rabbi Meir was his nephew. Onkelos. Onkelos was a nephew of one of the Roman emperors and became a Jew. Okay, but not only was he a Jew, he became one of the greatest sages of his time, and he wrote a commentary on the Torah. So these two Talmudic sages, who lived during the Second Temple era, and I'm forgetting, just a second, let me quickly Google it. Two Talmud sages who were converts in temple times. Let's see if it gives me that. Because it drives me nuts when I'm telling you a story and I forget who we're talking about. And Shmaya and Avtalion, those are the two. Shmaya and Avtalion. Okay. Shmaya and Avtalion, for those who wanted to remember. Anyway, Shmaya and Avtalion, these two great sages who descended from, maybe you'll even tell me here who they descended from. They descended from our enemies, it says here, okay? I'll quickly read to you what it says. The Talmud tells us that one of the reasons the Jewish people were exiled from the land of Israel and scattered throughout the world is that righteous converts would be able to join our ranks. Throughout history, the Jewish people have been enriched by many sincere converts from different nations who became Torah teachers and left their mark on Jewish history. You might know another famous one is Rabbi Akiva, who himself had a very late start, right? His parents were converts to Judaism. So we have Sisera, Rabbi Akiva, Sancheriv's descendants, Shmaya and Avtalion. Sancheriv is credited with destroying the first temple, okay? One of those who the first temple's destruction is attributed to. And yet he has descendants, several, during the second temple era, some of King Sancheriv's descendants converted to Judaism. Imagine that. It's like he was a Hitler in his time. And here his own descendants convert to Judaism. Can you imagine that? Anyways, one of the stories of the time goes as follows. The high priest, the Kohen Gadol, was leaving the temple. And of course, he was being escorted by an entourage. I believe the high priest was never allowed to walk on his own. Always out of respect for his position, he had a security detail, an entourage of people who were escorting him. At the same time, these two great sages, Shmaya and Avtalion, who were related to each other and were great sages in Israel, they also had an escort. They were walking with their students, and they're passing by the high priest. The sages greeted the high priest, and the high priest was a little bit of an egomaniac. And what did he say to them? Oh, here's the story. Let me read it to you from the Talmud itself. That's amazing that I see it in the Talmud, and it's worthwhile to read it to you from here. So let me just quickly find it. Shmaya and Avtalion were really, truly beloved by the Jewish people, and the Talmud relates that these two great leaders of their generation, Shmaya and Avtalion, who are great scholars and great expounders of the Torah. The respect the Jews had for Shmaya and Avtalion is illustrated in many stories, and here's one of them. One year at the conclusion of Yom Kippur, a crowd of well-wishers escorted the high priest on his way out of the temple, as was the custom. When the people saw Shmaya and Avtalion nearby, they left the high priest and followed Shmaya and Avtalion. That's the story. The high priest, clearly not the humblest person, unfortunately, in that time. And that position requires humility, in fact. Aaron HaKohen, who was their ancestor, was known to teach that we should be Oyev Shalom, lovers of peace. Not only should we love peace, we should pursue peace, right? We should love people and bring them closer to Torah. And when the two sages approached him and they greeted him, you know what he said? This priest. He said, let the descendants of foreigners go in peace. Is that a very nice thing to say about these two great sages? In fact, in last week's parsha, we read, Ve'ahavta sager, you should love the converts to Judaism, and you should treat them with dignity and respect, because you know what it's like to be a stranger amongst other people. And the person who converted, who does not have Jewish relatives, needs even more love and genuine, sincere care, right? Because they don't have the relatives like you do. And here the high priest, who's meant to be a role model of love, what does he do? He insults these two great sages. So, how would you respond if you were one of those two sages walking together? How would you respond? With kindness. That's what they did. Listen to their words. They said, let the descendants of foreigners, the Talmud is using a nice, or this translation is using a nicer term, because I think he said something more that connotated the brutal ancestor they had, Sancherib, who destroyed the temple. So they made a reference to him. And they said, rather the descendants of this evil person should behave like the descendant of the high priest Aaron, then the descendant of the high priest Aaron should behave like that evil person. How do you like that? Is that not a good comeback? Yeah.
Once someone is convicted,
Yeah.
good to them.
Absolutely. But in context, the Torah is telling us, first of all, the Torah verse can be translated two ways. Ger could mean a convert. Ger could also mean a stranger. You have a stranger in your midst. But either way, they both make sense. Whether it's treating a convert to Judaism respectfully or any stranger in your midst respectfully, I think it applies to both, right? You're absolutely right. We should not be reminding a person. That's what's so wrong about what this high priest did. The high priest was not acting as a high priest should. Does it ever happen that a rabbi or a parent or any leader acts in ways that they shouldn't? Yes. I'm sure there are times that I did not behave in a way that's becoming of a rabbi, and I beg your forgiveness. I remind myself that I'm human, but you know something? When you are carrying a certain title or a certain, every parent, by the way, this applies to. Because when our children see us behaving in a way that's unbecoming, it leaves an indelible impression on them, and one that's very hard to reverse. Okay? I remember my son telling me about a certain person who frequented our shul at a certain time. I don't know why I give you all these stories. One day they're going to come back to haunt me. But there was a certain person, and he wasn't somebody, this person behaved in ways that were out of bounds. You know what I'm saying? And sometimes my wife and I have learned that even though we have to be embracing and accepting of every person who comes, but certain people sometimes, they don't recognize or acknowledge certain, lines or limitations. So we started reciprocating in a way that perhaps wasn't right, but sometimes when your bounds are pushed, you do that. And I remember my kid saying to me, but you're a rabbi, you shouldn't be treating people that way. And it's right. And then I had to explain to him, look, tell my child, sometimes when somebody's in your property and maybe going in places they shouldn't, I don't want to go into all the details. Or maybe they're doing certain things, again, I have to respect, you don't want this to, there's confidentiality, so I'm not going to say what the details were. But now you have to try to explain to the child why you behaved in an unbecoming way, justifying my behavior. And I hope I don't get pushed into that situation where I have to justify why I behaved in a way that I shouldn't have. But sometimes we have a justification, but not others don't see it and don't know it. My child doesn't know it, and my child questions me. So I'm just saying, ideally, we should always be living up to our standard. Now, if we want to look at it the other way, maybe the Kohen Gadol had a bad day. Let's think about it. The Talmud said this was Matzah Yom Kippur. By the way, I don't recall reading the story previously that it was Matzah Yom Kippur. But think about, if Yom Kippur is difficult for you, don't you think it's even more difficult for the high priest? He was fasting. He couldn't sleep. The Kohen Gadol could not sleep all 25 hours of Yom Kippur. So let's give the Kohen Gadol a break here. But does that justify the Kohen Gadol speaking the way he did to them? I don't think so. But what's sweeter to me is their response. They said, better we, the descendants of an evil person, should behave like the descendant of the high priest than the descendant of the high priest should behave like a descendant of an evil person. I thought it's so profound, this expression. It's such a beautiful line that they said. They weren't ordinary converts to Judaism. They came from a Hitler kind of guy. A guy just, don't forget, Sancherov didn't just destroy the first temple and disperse thousands of Jews into exile. There were many lives lost along the way. There are many of our psalms that describe Al Narot Babel, on the rivers of Babylon, and all those descriptions that we know. There were many lives lost. That was a very evil person. So to think today, and we have it today, there are descendants of Nazis who've become Jewish. Okay? And we have to, I'm going to say this publicly. I once behaved inappropriately to somebody, a man. I was a teenage kid. It was wrong. But there was a man who I knew, came from Germany. I knew his story. He was a man who descended from a Nazi. His father was a real Nazi. This is back in the 1990s. And we were good friends at some point, and then he started acting very unpleasantly to me. And one day I said, "You Nazi." And a second later, I was filled with remorse and regret. I felt like the sickest person. Now, let me tell you, he wasn't nice to me. He did some things. Maybe I got on his nerves. I don't know. I don't want to go back. This is 30 years ago. But I remember it like yesterday that I said that to him. And it did not feel very good. We shouldn't do these types of things. Okay? And to this day, I'm ashamed that I did that. Of course, he triggered me, but that's no excuse. Okay? You don't do that. That's what the Torah is saying, don't do. Anyways, how did we even digress to this whole section? I don't even remember. I want to read here, probably in Yuma. I actually don't know. Let me just see here. I could look it up for you. The story, where is it in the Talmud? Let's see. I lost the place already. Shmaya Naftalion. I lost the. Here we go. Hold on. Yuma 71b. Now, what I said before was Yuma 75a. This was as a different Yuma 71b. Okay. I wasn't reading it in the Talmud. I was reading it on my phone. So you'll find the story and let me know. Okay, here is what the Tzemach Tzedek. Okay, sorry. Here was the question that I posed to you. And the question was the benefit of discussing with a friend. Here we go. The previous Rebbe quotes his great-grandfather, the Tzemach Tzedek, and he says as follows. What does it mean to talk about it with others? He says they are others not only in a bodily sense, however, they are completely united with you, for they empathize with you. Very interesting thought from the third Lubavitcher Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzedek. Tzemach Tzedek, I've told you all about him previously. His name was Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson. He lived in the mid-1800s. He was the great-grandfather of the Rebbe, and very similar in many ways. Of all the Chabad Rebbes, they both lived the longest, into their 90s. They both were known to have the most Hasidim, the most followers. I would say the Rebbe probably had the most followers of all the Chabad Rebbes, because if you look at today, the videos of the Rebbe and the social, the influence and impact the Rebbe had. But they say that Tzemach Tzedek had 600,000 or so followers across Eastern Europe. It's a big amount of followers. What else is interesting, and what was his wife's name? Chaya Mushka. And the Rebbe's wife was also Chaya Mushka. We just observed her yahrzeit last week. So these similarities are interesting. Either way, also, I think another similarity is their style of teaching. The Rebbe obviously emulated his great-grandfather in many ways. So the Tzemach Tzedek is explaining that the other person, while they're another person, that's only in body. But they must be united with you. They have to be somebody who cares for you. Because when you talk to a stranger, I don't know that a stranger necessarily has your back. Usually not. Also, they don't know you. It's hard for them to empathize with you. Although it's nice to talk to a stranger, to have somebody to talk to and talk your issues with, but usually a stranger is not that person. We're talking here about somebody who you could talk with, it could be mutually beneficial, somebody who will gain from, or you'll gain from their advice. Right? The very fact of speaking to somebody who feels your pain, right, who shares your burden, I think that itself can lift some of the weight off your shoulders and loosen the grip of worry of your consciousness. And that's a very important point. And this highlights, my friends, how friends and family and community and shul and seniors club, the importance of coming and connecting. One of our seniors who doesn't come anymore, he's not very well, but Leo Tancham used to tell me, you give me a reason to get up every morning, just to come here, just to have somewhere to go. Everything else is a bonus. So these are all important points about having somebody to talk your issues with. And that's certainly something. Although you're reminding me of a few other Vertelachen jokes. One of them was a friend of mine. He graduated from Witz Psychology School. I forget what it's called, but and he had a great professor who taught him all about psychology and empathizing and sympathizing and all those other benefits. And he felt like he really learned it very well, all in texts and classroom and in the classroom setting. You know what I'm saying? Conceptually. Anyways, his first day on the job, and he's listening to people's worries, and he just can't handle it because there's some serious issues out there, some really serious ones. And he's listening, and he doesn't know what to do. And he calls his professor, and he says, "Tell me, professor, how do you listen to all these people's worries and stories and problems?" And professor says, "Who's listening?" Maybe he goes on one ear out the other. I don't know. At least he pretends to listen. He charges for it, right? Psychologists are good at that. Said you have serious issues, and you know how they compound the issues. They make it even worse. And you better come next week for more therapy so I could bill you even more. As long as your medical aid pays, right? They tell a story about two psychologists who meet at their 20th graduation reunion, whatever they call it. And one of them looks like he just graduated, and the other one looks old and worried and withered. So the older looking one, he asks the other, "What's your secret? You also listen to all these people's worries and all that. How do you endure all day long for years on end? It's tattered me. It's made an old man out of me." And the younger looking one says, "You mean you actually listen?" Along the same lines. Anyways, what's the point, my friends, that the Talmud is telling us? Discuss it, talk about it with somebody else, and what happens? You both are lifted. In fact, in the introduction to Tanya, the Alter Rebbe tells us, when you study with someone else, you share with someone what you learned, Meir Einei Shneim, it illuminates the eyes of you and the other person. It benefits when you teach somebody else, it crystallizes the idea in your mind. And of course, the other person benefits, which is why my mother of blessed memory used to say to me to do homework with her while she was cooking supper. Okay, she wasn't sitting there necessarily engaged as a student, but while she was cooking, she was chopping I remember she was cutting the chatzilim, the eggplant, and the onions. She was making food, and she would ask me questions about what I learned, and I was able to do homework with her. I would tell her what I learned that day in Talmud. My mother never studied Talmud, but she appreciated to hear, and if she didn't understand, she would ask me to explain it. She would say, "I never studied Talmud before. Simplify it." So now when I was back in yeshiva, I couldn't just study Talmud in a way that it was luftik, that it was just theoretical and conceptual in my mind. I had to understand it well enough that I could explain it in simple terms to my mom who never studied Talmud. Because they didn't teach Talmud in the schools she went to. They probably still don't teach it in most girls' schools. But the point I'm making is that for me, that was a tremendous benefit. That I can have somebody who's a sounding board, who will listen to me, and I can't just regurgitate words. I have to actually understand and know what I'm saying. Now, of course, let's go back for a second, back to the original interpretation of the verse in Mishlei. Remember? Rav Ami and Rav Asi. Rav Ami said, you should push it away. Yasichana. What does that mean? How do you get rid of worries? You just suppress them. You throw them out the window. Reminds me of a story. Rabbi Groner here, Rabbi Groner in Johannesburg. You should be healthy and well. Rabbi Groner's father was the Rebbe's shliach to Australia, sent in the early 1950s. Him and his wife were sent to establish and set up Chabad in Australia. And boy, did he set up an empire of Chabad there. Incredible to see what they accomplished, what they achieved. I was in Australia last year, went for my niece's wedding, as you remember, and I got to see firsthand. Oh, it's already 2 years ago, maybe, a year and a half ago, whatever it was. So when I was there, I saw, unbelievable, how many shuls and Chabad houses and institutions and everything, a tremendous Chabad community that today started from very little. Anyways, it seems to me that Rabbi Groner Sr. had a lot of worries and problems. And once he sat with the Rebbe in a meeting, and he was telling the Rebbe about all his worries. And the Rebbe tells him, I forget the exact words, but in Yiddish, the Rebbe said, "Auf dem Weg zurück," on your way back to Australia, on the airplane, as you're flying above the Pacific Ocean, and the Rebbe was speaking, of course, euphemistically, he said, Var farois the mara, throw away all your depression, your melancholy. What's a better word for mara shchayra? All the sadness and worries in the Pacific Ocean. That's what the Rebbe said to him. Obviously, the Rebbe understood that that's figurative, not literal. But throw them all in the Pacific Ocean. Stop worrying so much. So how does it actually work? How do you throw away your worries? There's a story about Rabbi Shlomo Freitas. He was a Chabad Chassid during the first half of the 19th century. So we're talking a good, 200 years ago, nearly? And this rabbi, he had a daughter who married actually the son of the Tzemach Tzedek, the third Lubavitcher Rebbe we were talking about before. And this is 1820s, okay? I'm talking here literally about 200 years ago. And he wrote a letter to his mechutin, right? Because his daughter married the son of the Tzemach Tzedek. And he explains his worries about his health and his financial situation, okay? He obviously had certain challenges. And he was asking advice, like the Talmud says, probably about talking about it. So he has a mechutin. I don't know if it's a good idea to talk with your mechutin about your financial worries. Then they start getting worried. Will you pay the dowry? Either way, here's what the Rebbe wrote to him. He said, Al davar mevukasha. Let me put the letter up for you here. We said it the Tzemach Tzedek said it before. We mentioned how he said other person, other in body, but united in spirit. Okay, so they were related. So he says, regarding your question concerning fears, etc., although they are over naught, I have not refrained from answering by sharing what's on my heart. So it's an interesting terminology that he says. We'll dissect it. He says, your worries about nothing. So he's sort of belittling it in a way, but then he acknowledges it. Like, to you, it's something. I'm telling you, it's nothing. I think it's something we got to think about. You know, he's starting the letter off by saying that you're experiencing whatever you're worrying about. I'm telling you, you're worrying about nothing. But nevertheless, you are worried about it, right? I think most of us are familiar with this type of experience where you feel anxious about something, even though your rational voice within you tells you everything's going to be fine. Stop worrying, right? There used to be a commercial in the New York radios. I don't even remember what they were advertising, but I remember the commercial always used to answer, oh yeah, it was Radio Shack. Radio Shack. You ever heard of Radio Shack? Did they exist in South Africa? They're long gone in America, but they existed. Were they here? They sold like radios and I guess that's why the name Radio Shack and other portable electronic devices, speakers. And their commercial used to end, and don't you worry about a thing. I think it would go Radio Shack. And don't you worry about a thing. You see, you don't forget it. That was a good commercial. Either way, they were very big. They had franchises all over. But the point I'm making is, don't you worry about it. You are worried, okay? Now, even though you know that worrying is unreasonable, but does that solve the problem? You're worried about it, right? So first, the Tzemach Tzedek says, obviously he knew what the man was worried about. So he's telling him, because I don't think we should undermine what people worry about if it's real. Okay, sometimes people have real worries. The Tzemach Tzedek was obviously familiar with his worries and was saying, like, don't worry about it. But either way, he says, I know there's a concern on your heart. And it's a very interesting expression looking at those words, especially considering that if you read the rest of the letter, which we'll do together now, it actually starts getting a little bit more intellectual. Yet, he talks about what's on your heart, what's on my heart, or what's on your heart, on my heart. So he's connecting the two hearts. Somebody once asked the Rebbe, if the heart is all about your feelings and compassion and sympathy and empathy, right? Why is the heart in the left side of your torso? Shouldn't it be on the right side? Isn't the right side about compassion and kindness? Why is it on the left side if that's more about gevura, about discipline and judgment? Yeah? Without your heart, you die. We're not negating that. The question this person asked the Rebbe is, if a heart is all about compassion and kindness, it should be on your right side, shouldn't it? Why did God make it on your left side? And the Rebbe gave a very simple answer, not anatomically, not physiologically or biologically. You know what he said? He said, you're right, if your heart is just about feelings for yourself, then it should have been on the right side. But actually, your heart is on the right side of the person across you. Because you should have kindness and compassion and care for the other person. And they should have for you. Okay? One of the most beautiful Hayom Yoms, and I have it later on in here, is a beautiful teaching. The Rebbe says, when two people get together, we have two godly souls against one animal soul. How's that possible? Does it make any sense? See, how do you have two godly souls against one animal soul? And I understand it very simply as follows. Because when the two of us come together, we both have animalistic soul and we both have a godly soul. But who does my animal soul care for? My animal soul cares for me. My animal soul is a real narcissist, let me tell you. Egocentric. It all cares for is itself. And most likely, if you're a normal human being, your animal soul also only cares for you. Because that's what animals do. Animals are worried about themselves. And when they're worried about others, usually it has to do with themselves too. But my godly soul teaches me that I'm not soil like the animal, S-O-I-L, but I'm soul, S-O-U-L. Hence, my godly soul is concerned for you and your godly soul is concerned for me. So we have two godly souls teaming together against one animal soul. Because both our godly souls will be able to counter both of our self-centered, narcissistic animal souls. Anyways, let's go back to continue reading the letter. From heart to heart, I've written very empathetically. And this is especially important when you're responding to emotional issues. Yes, they have to have intellect. It has to be a cognitive and intellectual element, but there also has to be the emotional and heart element. So the Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzedek, continues in this letter. It is certain that you should ask God for joy, as it's written. Cause the soul of your servant to rejoice, right? David HaMelech says this in Tehillim. Sameach nefesh avdecha. He asks Hashem to cause the soul to be joyful, Similarly, we say in our prayers, V'hasser mimenu yagim v'anacha, remove gloom and melancholy lamenting from us. We all have our worries. But nevertheless, we know there are also fears that people trigger themselves, and the choice and authority is given to them to withhold themselves from them. It's actually a choice. In fact, we're going to see this soon, but I have to tell it to you now. What's the Hebrew word of being in a joyous state? Besimcha. And the word besimcha has the same exact letters as machshava. What's machshava? Thought. So for you to be joyous is a conscious decision that you have to make. It's in your thoughts. And here is a point that Reb Shlomo is telling his Rebbe, his Mechutin, that he prays that God remove his fears and bring him joy. And the Tzemach Tzedek tells him, of course, prayer is of tremendous value. But he says it's not enough. Right? In many areas in life, will you earn a living just by praying? Praying is important. You got to pray to God. It's a vital part of each day. But you also have to finish prayers and go to work, right? The same thing. Do we pray for healing? Absolutely. We have many prayers for healing. We say Misha Beirach, we say Rifa Einu. We have prayers of healing. At the same time, we also go to the doctor to take care of our health. Like we said before, you won't win that lottery without buying the lottery ticket. And so God's help materializes if we exert a reasonable effort to do what we are capable of doing. We have to do our part. You do your best and God will do the rest. But you have to do your best, right? So prayer will only be effective together with action, my friends, because there's a lot that we are capable of doing, that we could rid ourselves of worries that plague us, that riddle our mind, that drive us crazy. Prayer is one solution, and it's important to do it every single day, 3 times a day we do it. But it's not enough. You have to do your part too, okay? And therefore, we have to know we're not hostages to our emotions. The whole idea is many people view themselves as hostages of whatever emotion they're experiencing. People are worried and we're in all types of places. We feel sad. We think there's nothing that could be done. And we just get stuck in a rut, right? No? True? Not true? The Tzemach Tzedek says it's not true. No, you don't have to be stuck in that rut. In many, many situations, we have control of our emotion, of our lives, of our feelings. What was the story? I'm forgetting the story. There's some good story that comes to mind, but I'm forgetting it. Something to do with a person who was incarcerated until he realized that he had the key to the cell in his pocket. It's a good story. Reb Mendel Futterfass. Reb Mendel Futterfass was a chassid. I remember him. Passed away in 94, 95 as a very elder Jew. He spent a number of years in the Russian Gulag in Siberia. I think my grandmother may have been related to him somehow, but they definitely knew each other. Anyways, when he was in Syria, in the gulags in Siberia, he met with many other prisoners who were sent there to these harsh sentences and labor camps. They had to work every day. There was a lot of harsh conditions, but he picked up a lot of stories and he shared them when he came to America and Israel. He shared many of his stories. And one of the stories he said was, he had to make friends with everybody. Some of them were criminals. Some of them were all types of people. In fact, he remembers once they were having a gathering and discussing what they did before, and they were lamenting. One was a professional, one was an accountant, one was a doctor, one was a magician, one was they all had different positions. And they also look at us today. Woe to us. We're here in Siberia. We don't have control of our lives. We've lost everything. We've lost our identity. And Reb Mendel says he used to say to himself, while it's true that I've lost my freedom and I'm not able to be with my family, etc., but I haven't lost my identity. I was always Reb Mendel. I'm always a proud Jew. And no matter where I am, I believe in God no matter the situation. So he collected a lot of the stories. He wrote them down and he shared them afterwards. And we would tell the stories that he experienced. Many of them that I've shared in the past. One of them had to do with a card player. And it was illegal to have cards in their barracks. Right? The Russians, I don't know why. They like to make the life difficult for them. You're prisoners. You couldn't have fun and play cards. One day, a police officer came in, a guard, and he said, I know you guys have cards. And he's going to strip search everybody. And he strip searched all the prisoners, Reb Mendel included, every single one of them. And he searched them top to bottom, inside and out, and he never found the cards. When the officer left, this fellow took the cards back out. So Reb Mendel turned to him and said, I need another trick. Where did you hide those cards? He strip searched all of us. He says, very simple. I hid them in the officer's pocket, in the guard's pocket. And that story reminds me, we all have the key. Sometimes we just don't know where the key is. It might be in us. You ever searching for your glasses and they're on your head, right? Where are they? Okay, so the Tzemach Tzedek is telling us, how does this work? How are we able to tap into those feelings, to those emotions, to free ourselves of whatever is making us depressed? And so the first thing we have to understand is there are various levels of our soul. And I want to talk about the levels of our soul, getting a little bit Kabbalistic here, and attend the Rebbitzins class for more crash course Kabbalah. Today, I'll give it very simple. She'll give it in more detail. In Tanya, we've discussed before, there are 3 soul attributes. Actually, there's many more. There's 10. But we're going to talk about the 3 cognitive ones that, interestingly, spell the word. It's an acronym for Chabad. Thank you very much. Welcome to Chabad. And here is the acronym for Chabad. Chachma, Bina, Das. In Hebrew, that spells Chabad. What's Chachma? Wisdom. It's this concept of creativity. Okay, Chachma is the spark of creativity that we each possess, the flash of insight. I don't know why I use this example, but you can use any example you like. Maybe an architect, maybe because we're finishing building our shul now. So first is the concept, okay, the idea. It's just a thought, okay? It's just a spark in your mind. Then comes Bina. What's Bina? Understanding, discernment. This is the logical, something, you can't, you're going to try to now turn it into a concept. So maybe now you get an architect who's going to draw up plans for your building, okay? That's Bina. Bina is taking that idea and making it more practical. Do you have it yet built? No. First you had the idea. That's Chachma. Chachma is the spark of creativity. Chachma is the wisdom, I don't have to call it understanding. Understanding is Bina. But that's your first part. The second element now is dissecting it, what's a better word, it's turning it into a plan, right? That is the logical breakdown, that's Bina. And then we have Das. Das is knowledge or connection. It's all connected. Or the way we put it on the screen, Das is making it relevant. It's making it real. Okay? Das does not involve any new information. Das is about, it zeroes in, it focuses on a particular piece of information. How am I going to take my concept that's now a blueprint on paper, because I broke it down. And now I'm going to make it personal, relevant, real. And that leads to the 7 emotional attributes of Chesed, Gvur, Tiferes, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, Malchus. So we have to understand that these 3 attributes actually have different ways of unpacking it. One mode is when they are dormant, okay? Like they're asleep they're maybe on my computer. They're there, but they're not activated. You know what I mean? That's when they're just a capacity and potential within the soul. But the second mode is when they're active in our conscious life. We bring them to action. We start making them real. So if I'm busy analyzing something right now, it means that my thought is being applied to the soul attribute of, which one is analysis? Bina, I would say. Now, pushing Bina out of its dormant state into an active state. That it's not just on the computer, there's action going on. You know what I mean? So what about Chachma and Das now? While Bina is when I'm doing the analysis, they're more dormant. I'm not in the action state. You know what I mean? In other words, my thought activity, my thought activates these 3 powers and bridges them with my conscious life. Chachma is the idea. Bina is the process of analyzing it, of breaking it down logically. And Das is about the implementation, making it real. And now let's apply this to our worries. If I am worrying about something right now, by definition, it means that my thoughts are currently in Das, because I'm worried about it right now, right? The capacity within the soul to connect to something and experience an emotional reaction. I'm right now nervous. I'm worried about something. Does that ever happen to you? Yes? If I can manage to stop thinking about that, will it, I'll cut off that Das, I'll cut off the current worry. And this cuts the supply line for the emotion and will not be able to last. So I can stop the worrying. Not easy, but what do I need to do? I have to have the ability, and know I have the ability, to stop thinking about whatever I'm worrying about. Do we have this ability? Can we stop worrying about something? Absolutely. Okay? Chassidus explains that our internal, intellectual, or emotional makeup, okay, remember going through the 10 divine attributes that each of us has as well, is either not subject to change or very difficult to change. But behavior is within our control. And behavior is divided actually into 3 categories. Who remembers the 3 categories of behavior? What are they? Machshava, Dibur, Maaseh. Translates as thought, speech, and action. Very good. I thought I made a slide for that. It seems that I forgot to put it in. My apologies. This is why we call these, before I say that, what do we call those 3? Thought, speech, and action? The garments of the soul. Why are they called garments as opposed to the body? The body is something you can't change. You can't change your hand for a new hand, can you? We say the Chachma Bina Das, you can't exchange your brain for another brain, can you? Doesn't work. But garments are things that we could put on and take off at will. So our sages tell us, Machshava Dibur Maaseh. Our thought, speech, and action are within the domain of our own control. If we stop thinking about the worrying matter, then we could cut off the supply line for that emotion, for that worry, for that feeling. And which of these 3 is the one that sustains our emotions and that could bridge into the transition from worrying? Das. That's the implementation. And therefore, let me read this to you. The Tzemach Tzedek continues, and he tells us here in the same letter that he's writing to his Mechutim. He says, each person has three soul garments: thought, speech, and action, that comprise the primary components of our human behavior. The choice and power is granted to us, to each of us, to think, speak, and act in accordance with our desire. Now, of course, this is obviously easier for some people and harder for others. I'm not saying everything's easy for everyone. Some people have a harder time, others have easier time, right? And don't feel shame if perhaps it takes you longer or you need external help or professional help in order to activate that self-control. When he says that you have the self-control, sometimes you need assistance for that self-control, right? Some people need more than others. But he continues, even if you're emotionally afraid, you are able to remove your thought, speech, and action from that emotion. Immediately upon letting go of that thought, the fear will dissolve into its own. At the very least, the fear will become dormant and will not be felt in your body. And over the course of a few days, it will completely dissipate to the point that it will not come in your mind at all. Removing your thought from the fear will lead to the fear's dissipation, because emotions come from the faculty of das by means of thought. Therefore, by removing your thought, das is automatically removed from the emotion and it will not awaken. It is appropriate for you to train yourself away from all melancholy. While he wrote this to an individual, I believe it applies to everyone. Otherwise, this letter wouldn't be for public consumption. You can remove the fear from your heart, even when there's something legitimate to fear. Now notice at the beginning he said, you're worrying about nothing. But now he says, even if you feel there's something legitimate, all the more so in your case, in which, thank God, you have nothing to fear at all, whether it matters of your health or finances. So as is Mechutin, he's telling him, listen, I know what you're worrying about and I'm telling you not to worry. But even if you had a real, genuine concern or fear that you're worrying about, you still can cast it away. Isn't that interesting? Now here's something interesting from Fyodor Dostoevsky. Who's familiar with, well, Fyodor Dostoevsky sounds like some kind of Russian. I guess he was. He's a Russian novelist. And he wrote as follows: try to pose for yourself this task, not to think of a polar bear. And you will see that the cursed thing will come to your mind every minute. It's the same idea as I said before, don't think about the pink elephant. Yes? So you could certainly try this and notice that this is what's going to keep happening. I saw another professor put it this way. He asked his participants in a study that they should verbalize their stream of consciousness for 5 minutes and don't think about the white bear, okay? And if a white bear comes to your mind, what should you do? Every time, ring a bell. If a white bear came to mind, he told them to ring the bell. So despite the explicit instruction to not think about the white bear, what do you think happened during his whole experiment? This is 150 years ago. This is a long time back. They kept ringing the bells, okay? So think about, whatever it might be. Think about whatever's important to you right now. And I'm going to tell you the same thing. Let's try this out. Don't think about the white bear. And if you do think about the white bear, I'm giving you 60 seconds here. You have to clap your hand, okay? Close your eyes. Don't think about a white bear. Just think about other things. If the white bear ever comes to your mind, I want you to clap your hands, okay? Don't think about a white bear. Don't. I wish all our participants online could hear all the applause we're getting here. Okay. When we try not to think of something as part of our minds, what happens? It starts coming up all the time. So if we try hard to avoid thinking about something, we end up thinking about it even more. So what's the solution? Let's go back to the Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzedek's letter. He says the primary method of removing negative thoughts from your mind is directing your mind towards something. Exactly. And this could be whatever it is, worldly things, if they're necessary, that make you happy. And better yet, God's Torah, which delights the heart, by establishing fixed times for daily study, particularly with another, which is a very important point. In Judaism, we know there's something called Kavias Itin LaTorah. We set aside time each day, which you do coming here, to study Torah. Now, as long as we're trying to suppress just to suppress our mind from the white bear, from the pink elephant, from whatever's bothering you, it's not going to disappear because your mind is hyper-focused on that. But if you, as hard as you try, it's not going to work. We're going to fall deeper into the mud. But when we try a self-distraction, then the negative thought has somewhere to go because there's something to replace it, right? So if we try to suppress a thought, it just becomes part of us. But if we're going to suppress it by replacing it with something else, then what happens? It becomes absorbed in something else, or whatever other interesting and engaging things that's occupying our mind now. And that's perhaps the point here. And I think that's the idea, that if we could use our minds to focus, to think about better stuff, then what's going to happen? Our mind will be filled with those better stuff. And that's what the Tzemach Tzedek is saying here to his mechutin. Study Torah, do mitzvahs, get engaged in other things, be involved in good deeds. So I think ultimately both points are valid. You could push away your thoughts, or you can engage in something in positive discussion. And whatever works for you, okay? We all have different types of worries and different ways of dealing with the worries. But the goal is to clear our minds from whatever worrisome thoughts we have and engage in something more positive. That's the point. A great story that comes to mind, I haven't told it to you in a long while, was a story of a chassid of the Maggid of Mezrich. And he complained that he had no control over his thoughts, no self-control. You ever feel that way? No self-control? Yeah, I don't know what entered his mind. Right? You get those, what happens? I told you about the big sign outside our shul that said, want to kill time? Watch Showmax. Well, he couldn't control his mind, and his mind kept wandering in different places. And you can know sometimes our minds wander in the wrong places. You know, they go on journeys, especially like during the Amida, you know what I'm saying? So this fellow, he came to his Rebbe, the Maggid of Mezrich. The Maggid said, I want you to go to the home of Reb Wolf. Reb Wolf lived in Zhytomyr. It was a little distance away, so travel to him. He is good at telling you. Hey, the chassid thought to himself, wow, I'm probably going to go to some professional mind expert who could tell you how to not let these thoughts creep into your mind. And he gets to Zhytomyr, he travels there, and he gets off the train, and he comes to Reb Wolf's house, and he starts knocking. Nobody's answering. He sees there's a doorbell. He rings the doorbell. He bangs louder and louder. He's knocking. No answer. He went to the back door, and he's banging harder and harder. He's banging on the shutters of the window. Garnished, no answer. But he notices, he hears there's people in the house. He could see them through the cracks of the window shade or whatever it was, and they don't answer him. And he felt somewhat dejected. I came here to speak to this expert, and he doesn't let me in even. So he goes to shul to daven mincha. Anyways, he's in the shul, and there he sees Reb Wolf, the expert. So he comes to Reb Wolf, and he says, I came to your house earlier, and I banged, I knocked on the door, I rang your bell. He wouldn't let me in. I came to talk to you, as my Rebbe told me. I should talk to you about all these foreign thoughts that enter my mind. I came for your help, but you wouldn't let me in. Aha, said Reb Wolf, you see, I am the master of my house. And if I don't want you to enter, I'm not going to let you in, no matter how hard you try, right? So I hope you learned the lesson. And this is a very important key to controlling our thoughts, is to know and act that we are the master of our homes. We are the master of our minds. And if you see yourself as the master, you could begin to behave like a master. A master doesn't let whatever strangers or strange thoughts in. And ultimately, I think that's an important message for all of us. As we could see here from the letter of the Tzemach Tzedek, that we each have to be the masters of our minds. And we have to know that each of us can control what we let in and what we don't. Any thoughts, comments, questions, alternative ideas, what you gleaned, what you learned from today's discussion? We'll continue with, please God, on Monday to pivot into the simcha, the joy that we need to have. And on Monday, please God, I'm going to talk more about in God we trust, and how when we feel like we hit rock bottom, never to give up hope and to realize God is always in control. A quick reminder that tomorrow we have Dr. Stern. And Dr. Stern is going to talk to you about our medical problems. Are they just life? Is it normal aging? When should you take action? Are we sometimes over-diagnosing everyday experiences? And how do we navigate the gray areas wisely and calmly? And perhaps Dr. Stern will connect this idea to how we could be in control of our health, not only our emotional health, but maybe our physical health too. And I look forward to this fascinating talk, and I invite you all to come, to be here, to be part of it. Don't forget, you could come a little bit earlier for our exercise class with Karen Shapiro tomorrow. So don't miss that at 9:45. Come earlier for your pearls of wisdom that you could record and write down. Have a coffee. We'll have some more cake for you tomorrow and goodies. I hope the cake is on its way for you now. And yeah, thoughts. Alan, you wanted to say something? Oh, that's funny. All right. Any other? That's brilliant. You see, I told you not to think about it. You should count your brachas. All right, absolutely. Count your blessings. Yeah, count your blessings. What else? Radio Shack. They were here. Let's see. Yeah, they were in Rosebank. Yeah, I see the picture. Same exact Radio Shack we had in America. It was started in 1921. It's an American iconic electronics retailer. So it was here. You missed that. Okay, it's mostly online today. When did they close here in Joburg?
They didn't. The Radio Shack went bankrupt in America.
Yeah.
They were taken over by an international company,
Ah,
which turned them into a online store.
okay, so it's only online now.
There is one, they mentioned one called Tom's Shack in town,
In town, interesting.
which is
A subsidiary of, okay,
Yeah.
interesting. Fascinating.
So they're still around.
They're still around, Radio Shack. I don't hear the commercials on the radio. Certainly haven't heard that "Don't you worry about a thing" in a while.
But if you go onto YouTube, you might hear it.
Yeah. There's actually a website that collects all those old great commercials. And it's funny, yesterday I came across OU, you know, the Orthodox Union, the best Pesach ads of 100 years ago. OU's been around over a century now, the Kashrut Authority in the United States. And I think they were the first Kashrut Authority. They probably started certifying Manischewitz matzah in the 1880s. And it's fascinating. There were great ads back in the day. In newspapers and in other places. I saw Heinz ketchup had an ad in the 1950s. And it said, "Heinz ketchup will not be kosher." That was the headline. And it's, you're like, what? Not going to be kosher. And then you start reading the fine print. For 8 days, we're not kosher for Passover. But the rest of the year, you could rely on a Heinz product, and it lists there all the products that are kosher. Some really good ads from the past, from nearly 100 years ago. It's incredible. You look at these things. There always was creativity before computers, before AI. It's unbelievable. Any other thoughts, questions, comments before we conclude today? A very fresh cake is on its way. I think, they're still baking it. So just give it a couple of minutes, and maybe you'll have it for dessert instead of for your Farshbeis. Instead of your starter, you'll have cake for dessert. Okay, ladies and gents, if you're not here in person, enjoy cake wherever you are. Zeitgesund, come join us tomorrow because we didn't get it to you on time this morning. You'll have your cake just now, and you'll even be able to eat it.